I've been making prints the last few days. Admittedly, I haven't been using this printer really as much as I should, and I'll tell you why I haven't and why I should. And in this video, I'll discuss the pros and cons of owning a printer. I watched a video the other day from a popular photographer here on YouTube who chimed in on the, I guess you'd say, debate around the terms take or make when it comes to creating photographs. I'm sure I've used the term make or made on this channel in reference to my photos more than take. Anyway, if memory serves, the source of that declaration that photographs are made, not taken, originated with Ansel Adams. And in that context, I understand exactly what he meant. He wasn't being pompous. Ansel passed away in Carmel, California on April 22nd, 1984. I recall the exact date because I happened to be passing through the area. It's a long story, but I ended up getting a tour, guided by some of Ansel's friends, of a retrospective of the maestro's work as it was being hung at the photographer's gallery in Carmel. The show included prints from Adams' darkroom going back to the late 20s, early 30s, and these were printed quite differently than his later images, less Beethoven, I would say, and they tended to be warm tone rather than the cold selenium toned images of the work we tend to associate with him. Not to mention, they were much smaller. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Adams did indeed make his photographs from start to finish. And I maintain that a photograph isn't truly finished until it's a print. Hold on, I'm not finished quite yet with this idea. It's one I've toyed with in other videos, but I want to flesh it out here because every time I make a print, the whole history, if you will, of my printmaking career is brought to bear, including all the great prints I've seen over the years. But before I lose the direction of this ramble, let me explain the practical points I made at the beginning of the video. I haven't been printing as much as I should because print sales have been lagging lately. This started with the pandemic, and sales haven't returned to normal. I'm not alone in this predicament. Other photographers I know or correspond with have taken a similar hit. Of course, gallery shows and the associated sales were completely eliminated for some time, and they're only just returning. So that leaves printmaking of a purely speculative nature, hobbyist or for my own pleasure. Now to the practical of why I should print more often, because a printer like this Epson Stylus Pro 4900, built for commercial use, left unused for a week, will inevitably lead to clogged print nozzles and a tremendous waste of ink during the head cleaning process. The printer has 11 inks, 10 in use at any one time. It has 2 black inks, photo black and matte black. Each 120mm cartridge costs around $135 Canadian. The printer doesn't have dual lines, so it must purge whatever ink is in the system when, say, you switch from glossy to matte paper. Some of its successors, like the P900, now include dual lines, so there's no purging needed. And less expensive ink ends up in the so-called maintenance tank. So I guess what I'm getting at, if you don't plan to print often, this part of making photos is not inexpensive. But I should say here that I don't think it's elitist to stress that a print is really the ultimate expression of photo making, or taking if you like. Beyond the semantics of whatever you want to call the sum of the parts, from pressing the shutter to the end product, today some photographic images are indeed created to be presented on screens. Maybe the majority. They'll never see the light of day, so to speak, only the light of a backlit LCD. And that's fine. Because one thing's for sure, that's the vast majority of photographic images you and I consume, and I use the word consume deliberately. They come to us on screens of one sort or another and are edited on screens at least. Though I'm not forgetting those who still choose to labor under the amber light of a darkroom. I made my living for years as an advertising photographer, shooting thousands of photos made for print publication in magazines, flyers and catalogs. That was their intended use. Millions of dollars flowed into the production of those impeccably styled, creatively lit, and carefully photographed images, all of which ultimately ended up in recycling bins, or worse yet, the landfill. Today, most photographs, we might say, are designed to be glimpsed for a second on Instagram. Well, I guess the best might slow the viewer's swipe impulse a millisecond longer than the next. And when it comes to social media, still images are in competition with moving images, or reels, shorts, TikToks of mind candy for the hard of seeing. Because who has time for meditation on meaning? But isn't it up to us as photographers to slow down and answer for ourselves what meaning there might be in the images we create? So to sum up, making prints yourself completes the photo making process. The print is the final expression of your vision. Not that you can't reinterpret at a later date. It becomes an actual artifact rather than a flicker, no pun intended, on a screen. Spending 4 days searching for meaning in my archive, an archive that spans more than 6 decades of my photography. I guess it's been an education of sorts, alternately depressing and sometimes inspiring, satisfying and disappointing. It also brought to the forefront a struggle I have here on YouTube, because there's so many channels based on, what do you call it? Well, like the one I mentioned earlier. Photographers who, I guess, the kind of point of view channels, I guess. I've done a bit of it here. But the problem, as I see it, at least from the point of view of my practice, is that when it comes to my personal work, well, I delete most of it. That is, I rarely make or take a photo that's worth keeping, or should I say, printing, because it might languish on a hard drive, if it's a digital image, until the next house cleaning sweep. So if I were to make more of that kind of content, maybe they'd come with a proviso that the photos would likely end up in the trash after the video. As a commercial photographer, I had to produce, make, or take, it didn't matter to the art directors, a photograph that did the job it was intended to do. Sell a product or service. Ultimately, that meant showing something in a pleasing light. And really, that's what every creative photograph has to do, right? Without light, there aren't any photographs. Photograph means, literally, a light drawing. An image created by light falling on a photosensitive surface. Between that literal meaning and an image that pleases, or in some way attracts the eye of the beholder, lies a universe of interpretation that includes everything from the superficial, style and passing fads like presets and plugins, to the psychological predisposition of the person that's looking at it, which can be affected by those surface considerations. So, too big a subject to examine here. So if I'm true to my own vision, then the photographs I've created, the photographs I've made or taken, will find their place in the world, or not. I chose to commit these images to paper over the last few days because they're meaningful to me, because they represent to me some of the best examples of what I found meaningful in my lifelong photographic exploration of the world. Each of them, to one degree or another, is a symbol, a cipher. I don't think that's too pedantic a term. For some desire, some fear or fantasy or attempt to understand my life and the landscapes I've moved through, internally and externally. I hesitate to interpret the words of Ansel Adams, who left this mortal coil going on 40 years ago. But I don't think he was just engaging in hair-splitting. I think, going on my knowledge of a lot more of what he shared in his books, what he meant is that a photo is not just sitting there waiting for us to take. That's the wish of many picture takers, that the act of photo creation, from camera to social media, might be automated so that the hoped-for accolades will follow as soon as possible. And incidentally, that's been a major driver behind camera connectivity, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. not just to get the winning goal to picture editors in the fastest possible time. Adam's statement considered all the steps in his creative process that began with what he called pre-visualization, a sort of meditation on the way he wanted to interpret the scene, ultimately on paper. So that meant everything from exposure of the negative in camera, development of the negative, and the final creation of the print. All these things most of us now do via digital processing. But it's still possible to include Adam's theories, at least. I think they still have relevance today. Adams explained that in making a photograph, you don't just use a camera. You bring along all the pictures you've seen, the books you've read, the music you've heard, the people you've loved. He explained that he was most interested in something built up from within rather than just extracted from without. Some people I know think Adams' work formal and overly intellectual. Sure, he was working at the same time as photographers like Lee Friedlander, Gary Winogrand, Bruce Davidson, and in Japan, Daido Moriyama, who were upending what had been considered the formal parameters of good composition, even exposure and image quality. Thank goodness for that. We have so many influences today, including those who have led the idea of deconstruction in photographic imaging. And I have to admit that the whole conceptualist movement, so popular in the Vancouver scene where my photography career began, it leaves me cold. Even printed on giant backlit Duratrans installations. But that's the thing, isn't it? Photography endures. Well, not necessarily on Duratrans, but it endures in many forms. And if I was going to sum up, let me just say this. If my work looks more like it was influenced by the straight school of photography, I'm fascinated by Moriyama's aesthetic of grainy, rough, blurry, and out of focus, more so than I am much of the postcard perfect work that has taken hold in the last decade or so. And though I did experiment in 35mm with a sort of Friedlander approach when I first started shooting on the streets of Vancouver, ultimately, I think, looking back, my aesthetic as such has been more Eugene Atgay. But whatever. I think it was Walker Evans who said of Atgay's talent that he simply knew where to stand. And I've got to say, that's the trick I'm still working on. So it's been interesting to again search through my catalog, if you will, for overlooked gems. There must be something brilliant in there that's maybe, I don't know, aged to some kind of tasty vintage, or to examine new work in a new light. Test prints like these, whether from new or older work, are part of the process that ultimately decides if an image makes the final cut. And it's an important process. I sold reproduction rights to another of my vintage images this week, a photo made over 40 years ago, for a book cover. So that's another kind of printing. I'll have to wait for August to see what the designer did with it. Well, I hope you found this interesting or informative. If you did, please give it the old thumbs up. I'd love to know if you print your photos or if you'd like to. Let me know in the comments below. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. And if this is your first time, we'd love to see you here again. Please consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Oh, and just a channel note. Tomorrow, I'm going in for a minor medical procedure. I'm hoping that it won't keep me away for long, but I do have a video or two near completion to tide things over. And there's over 150 videos to peruse here now. So in the meantime, take care, cheers, and we'll see you later.